Hello folks and welcome back to the channel. Been really pleased with everyone supporting the channel. And remember, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. You'll get notifications every time a new video goes up on YouTube. Now, today's method is going to really please all of you guys who are a little bit financially embarrassed or you're a little bit tight, because it's all about feeding literally nothing. Feeding zero bait but catching loads of fish. I've been fishing a few matches on commercials at this time of year, and in the last few weeks I've noticed that the fish just don't want to feed. A lot of fish are a little bit moody. Maybe they're a little bit spawn bound, but they're cruising around. They just don't want to settle on any feed whatsoever. But the weather's been warm, so those fish have been in the upper layers of water, and the only way to catch them is to create a bit of noise on the surface and trick them into feeding. Slapping a bait on a pole at 13, 14, 16 metres has been a fantastic method, and it's caught me out a few times in the matches that I've fished, because really I should have committed to that tactic. So what I want to do is talk to you about slapping a pellet, long pole shallow fishing, and talk to you about the method really that I should have done in maybe a couple of the matches that I've just recently fished. So first things first, let's talk about the rigs that I'm going to use, because once I've talked to you about the tactic, we're going to have a little session fishing, probably 15-20 minutes fishing away, just to show you the crux of the method. Hook bait wise, and this is important that I mention the hook bait, because we're on a fishery that's a little bit mixed, there's some f1s and some carp. I'm going to be using a 6mm pellet today. If I was fishing purely for carp, I'd be using an 8mm pellet, and that would mean a bolter top dibber style pole float. But because we're using that smaller pellet as hook bait, I'm going to be using a bristled pole float. Still quite a nice thick bristle. That's a 2mm bristle. It's a fiberglass stem. Now I like either a wire or a fiberglass stem for my carp fishing. Fiberglass sits nicely in the water, there's a bit of weight there, but also it's really strong. So obviously on a shallow rig where your float might be in the landing net with the fish, a fiberglass stem just helps with strength in that department. You'll see it's a 4x10s float, the body's nice and compact. This method's all about making noise and replicating the sound of a pellet hitting the water surface. So a nice compact body, float body. When I rotate the pole and slap the rig onto the water surface, that's going to hopefully replicate the sound of a pellet hitting the surface. Shotting wise, I've got two number 10 slot shot underneath the float, just to right the float as quick as possible. Halfway down the rig, I've got a bulk of 3 number 10s. Again, nice little bulk. It's going to replicate that sound of a pellet hitting the water. So we've got the sound from the float, we've got the sound from the little bulk of shot there, just above the hook length. The hook length's 8 inches. We've got size 18 eyed hook there, a bait band on a hair rig to house that pellet. When I slap this rig over, I hope you can see there that there's going to be 3 splashes on the water. There's going to be the float, the bulk, and then the hook bait itself. All that noise is going to attract fish to the area and hopefully make them make a mistake. Main lines, hook lengths, elastics, it's all venue dependent. Obviously if I was fishing for big fish today, this would all be scaled up, but we could be catching carp, we could be catching f1s. So main line for today is 0.16. I've got a hook length of 0.12. Might have to up that if I start catching a lot of carp later on, but experience tells me that 0.12 is about right for catching f1s, and if I take my time, should be all right landing any carp. Elastic wise, it's a yellow reactor core. Important is that length between pole tip and float. So between elastic and float, I like to keep a length of sort of like 6 inch, 8 inch maximum. The reason being is I want every fish to hook themselves against the pole tip if possible. And also, when I'm slapping a rig constantly, I don't want to be making big rotations with my pole. I want to make a smaller rotation as possible. And obviously if I had a long line between pole tip and float, it would mean I'd be lifting the pole right out of the water and swinging it round. Short line helps with that. Now, I have got 2 rigs set up. Remember, we're feeding literally nothing today, so we can't control the depth that these fish are feeding at with our loose feed. We can only control it really with the noise we're making on the surface, and weather conditions are going to have a massive impact on the depth that these fish are feeding at or sitting at. So I've got 2 rigs set up. You can see there, they're both exactly the same rig, apart from the depths they're set at. One's set at about 18 inches, one's set at a foot deeper, and we've got a bit of a variable day ahead of us. We've got a bit of cloud cover, so I imagine that when the sun comes out, we'll be catching on the shallow rig. And then when the clouds come over and we get a little bit of shade on the water and a bit of wind on the water, we'll be fishing on the deeper rig. Constant though is the length between pole tip and float, 7-8 inches, and obviously shotting pattern, bulk at half depth, same size float, everything is exactly the same. I'm going to talk to you about bait choices because there's two baits really that I use for this sort of method. The first one, and this is the bait that seems to be doing the damage everywhere I go when I'm fishing, when guys are fishing this method or when they're even mugging on a pole. It's a 6mm Robin Red hard pellet. It's just a plain pellet out of the feed, out of the bag of feed. They're a beautiful pellet. They've got really sharp edges on them, so they're easy to put in a band. They stay as in a pellet form for a long while. So some pellets, when you put them in the water, they go soft. Especially when you're slapping them on the water, you're putting that pellet through quite a bit of stress. Bits break off it, they go soft. You know, you end up with a little ball of brown in your bait band. But these pellets, because they've got slightly higher oil content, they stay intact for a lot longer. Also, the red colour seems quite important. I think these fish are picking out that red colour. Because you fish up in the water, obviously that red colour, it must be silhouetted against the sky a lot better, but for whatever reason that red colour seems really important. Now, going against that, if the water was a little bit clearer than it is here today, and the fish were sitting a little bit higher, these are what I'd be using. Really they're meant as a method feeder hook bait, but for mugging fish, when they're sitting sort of like 8 to 6 inch deep, something like that, really close to the surface, or when the water's a little bit clearer and they can pick out a really bright bait, these washers are fantastic. Obviously just slip them in a band just like you would a pellet. They sink really slow. So when you're slapping your pellet on the water surface, sometimes that fish comes to investigate and your pellet is whooshed by the fish way too fast. That's where these come into play. Just sinks nice and slow, means that your hook bait's in the fishing zone for a lot longer. Now what I want to do is just get the pole out, fish for 10 or 15 minutes and just talk you through the process behind slapping a rig. Hopefully we'll catch a few fish, hopefully we'll make a few changes and see what happens. So then folks, I'm itching to get going. We've not fed anything. We're just going to see if we can get a few bites slapping this pellet around. So 6mm pellet goes in the band. I'm going to try the shallow rig to start with. Set about 16, 18 inches deep. Let's just see what happens. Now, I'm going to talk about it as if the noise on the surface is the actual feeding pattern, because that's our way of attracting the fish. So I suppose it is a way of feeding. But what we want to do is we don't just want to slap the pellet once. We want to make a bit of noise. We want to actually attract the fish to that little area. So we're going to rotate the pole, slap the pellet on the surface 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. It's up to you, however many times you think you need to get a fish, to get the fish in that little area. And the idea is just to slap your pellet on the water in the same spot as many times as you think you need to, and then we'll let it fish. And by let it fish, I mean just slap it on the water and just let it, there we go. Oh, one right really high then. You can see there, as soon as I've laid it in the water and let the pellet fish, we've had a bite. Now the reason this method works so well is because obviously commercial fisheries are so highly stocked with fish. You're never too far away from a fish. The fish usually want to be in the upper layers when the sun's out, and they're so used to pellets as a bait. Obviously it's become their staple diet, so they're used to the sight, the smell, but importantly the noise of pellets hitting the surface. They're really tuned into it, so obviously they come up to investigate what's going on, and hopefully, because you've only got your one pellet in the swim, you're going to get a bite. Now what we're looking to do is, again, set the peg up by slapping it on the water a few times, and then we're going to let the bait fish. Now I don't want to, once I've slapped that pellet in, I'm not sliding the rig back. I'm slapping the pellet in, then it's sinking in the same spot that it's going into the water. The last thing you want to be doing is slapping the pellet in, then sliding the rig out of the splash area. You want the fish to be in that little tiny area, ready to take your bait. Now the wind today it's a little bit squirrely, to be honest, but it's mainly left to right over our shoulder. So I always like to slap a bait sort of downwind. I think it helps keep a tight line. Now if the wind was to our, got a fish cruising into the swim now. If the wind was to our right, sorry, if the wind was right to left, we'd be slapping the pellet anti-clockwise. Again, just to slap the pellet downwind and try and keep a tight line to it. But hopefully you can see the crux of the method is to be busy and be active, making noise on the surface. Not slapping the pole tip on the surface, we're just trying to make a noise with that one pellet, that hook bait. And we'll put it back in the spot. We've just created that little area. And I don't mind resetting. If the wind grabs my pole, it's, like I say, the wind's a little bit nasty today. If the wind grabs my pole and moves the rig just even a couple of inches, I'll just repeat the process. There we go, we've got one. And slap the rig again. So you can see there, we've not fed anything whatsoever. And we've got a fish. I'm guessing it's not a big fish, I think it's probably an F1. But it shows the merits of the method because, like I say, we've not fed anything whatsoever. It's first drop in, look, landing net's bone dry. First drop in. And we've got a nice little F1 to kick us off. Like I say, this venue, we're at Shearsby today, Shearsby Valley Lakes. Beautiful venue, not far from my house. And it's a real mixed venue. So there's carp, beautiful F1s like that. There's barbel, crusions, tench. I mean, you come here and fish maggots on a top kit and you'll have a lovely day's fishing, a real mixed day's fishing. You know, it's not an out and out carp venue, this isn't, but still think it's an ideal place just to show you what this method's all about. Now the other thing you may notice is when I'm shipping out, I'm just having a quick check of the pole sections. Because obviously when you're slapping your rig and rotating it, sometimes your pole sections can wear loose. Some manufacturers are worse than others. Pole I use is pretty good for it though. It stays pretty together while you're fishing. Now it's all about making a quick decision. So the wind has just dropped now, the sun's out. And to me, that means the fish are going to come slightly shallower. Now, if this wind was to get up, or if the cloud cover was to get up and it turn a little bit cooler, then I'll be picking up that deeper rig straight away because I think the fish should be dropping a bit deeper. It's just reading the conditions and reading the situation. The other thing that you'll probably notice is that carp will sit a little bit a little bit deeper than F1. So F1s will be higher in the water than your carp are. So if you're catching a lot of F1s and you want to try and target some carp, maybe dropping a little bit deeper is the way to go. Now, I've obviously said that we're not going to feed anything today, but it doesn't mean that feeding doesn't work with this method, because after all, we're just fishing. We're shallow fishing really, just being very active, making a noise. So feeding 100% does work with this method. But recently, with those fish not settling over any feed, it's just not been the way to go on the venues that I've been fishing. So I want to talk to you about the times when I'd probably use a bit of bait in conjunction with this style of fishing, this slapping style of fishing, because it has worked for me really well in the past. There we go, got another one. And it works really well when you're using oily bait. So catapulting oily baits, but well away from your swim, slightly upwind of your fishing position, is a brilliant way of attracting fish, because what happens is an oil slick will be created on the water surface. It will drift over where you're fishing. Fish love the flat water, the oil slick that's been created. They'll sit in that. then obviously you're slapping your rig there, there's no other bait there, and you'll catch the fish. So feeding bait even sort of like 5, 6, 7 meters away from where you're fishing and letting that oil slick drift over your fishing spot has caught me loads of fish in the past. Works obviously really well with baits like meat, hemp seed, obviously another great oily bait. And even if you've got fishery pellets, adding some oil to it doesn't have to be anything special. Something like even vegetable oil, or obviously a lot of companies do a dedicated sort of fishing style oil. But that oil slick is really important. We've not done it today because I want to just show you, I want to give you guys and me a bit of confidence that these fish are definitely going to come to just basically the noise of your bait. And there we go, nice little carp. And I think that's ample proof that the method works. So next time you're out on a commercial and you see a few fish cruising around, they don't look very interested, and you've fed a bit of bait and they never seem to settle on any bait, put a 6mm Robin Red on, slap it around a bit, try and make a bit of noise, be active, swap your rigs around. It's not all about feeding loads of bait to get fish in your swim, it's about catching the fish. Until next time, folks, tight lines.